This comparative study will evaluate the films Dead Poets Society and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest to answer the question, how do directors use coming-of-age films to inspire their audience to live their lives in a more purposeful way? A coming-of-age film is a movie in which the protagonist goes through an experience that ultimately helps or forces them to mature. There are multiple tropes that exist within this genre. The ones present in these two movies include a weathered mentor, characters realizing new goals and then being prevented from these goals, and finally an alternate and more hopeful story. These were created in two different film movements, and so while they both portray these tropes and genre, they do so through different techniques. Through lighting, characterization, mise-en-scène, and plot, Milos Forman and Peter Weir create films that inspire their audience to live more meaningful lives. In general, these films reflect the movements in which they were created. Dead Poets Society was made in the modern cinema or blockbuster era of film. While it's generous to call this movie a blockbuster, it has many traits of that era. The characters are likable, it had a large budget, and a very famous star. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, on the other hand, was made as a part of the post-classical cinema era, and was characterized by plot twists and blurred lines between good and evil. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest has mean and destructive characters that appear static. In contrast, Dead Poets Society has more likable and friendly characters that have understandable motives and flaws. The costuming contributes to the film's common genre and contrasting movements. The characters in both films have to wear uniforms, which visually display their conformity. However, in Cuckoo's Nest, they wear white hospital gowns, and they are thus physically and literally stripped of any individuality. The setting of the films contributes to the subgenre and movements. They are set in a mental institution and a school. Both of these demonstrate some level of compliance, but these are supposed to be places which stimulate the growth of their subjects, but ironically, they stunt it. As explained in the English Journal, the setting reflects the conflict between conformity and freedom of choice. Cuckoo's Nest does so almost explicitly and ruthlessly, while Dead Poets Society does so with a guise of creating a better future for their students. The experienced mentor of Dead Poets Society is Michael Keating, the new English teacher at Welton Academy. His motto is Carpe Diem, which is Latin for seize the day. Over the course of the movie, he teaches his students how to appreciate life and not passively agree with whatever their parents want of them. He does so by teaching them the beauty in literature. Keating enables his students to feel powerful in an institution that frequently makes them feel insubordinate. This high angle of the shot demonstrates how Keating literally brings his students into a position of power which is unfamiliar to them. The mentor in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is Patrick McMurphy. Similarly to Keating, McMurphy encourages the patients of the mental institution to not blindly agree with whatever Nurse Ratched tells them. He believes that the patients are holding themselves back and are enabled in doing so by Nurse Ratched.
Jesus, I mean, you guys do nothing but complain about how you can't stand it in this place here, and then you haven't got the guts just to walk out? I mean, what do you think you are, for Christ's sake, crazy or something? Well, you're not.
Both characters challenge the people around them, help them grow, and expose them to a new way of living. The difference between them lies in how they teach these new things. Mr. Keating is kind and charismatic.
Well, come on.
His teachings are an abrupt change to what his students are accustomed to, but they are delivered in an exciting way, and so the students accept them relatively well. McMurphy, on the other hand, is vulgar and often mean. These characteristics are reflective of the movements that these movies were made in. This explains why McMurphy is such an abrasive character, and it is logical that Keating is likable, because this film was made in an era that delivered to mass audiences. The characters that quickly display the most change are Neil Perry and Billy Bibbit. Neil Perry is the charismatic son of a very strict father, and he loosely acts like the leader of the Dead Poets Society. Early into the movie, he discovers his passion for acting, and he joins the local production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Billy Bibbit learns to be more confident when interacting with women and in general. There are characters that prevent them from following new pursuits. Neil's father, Mr. Perry, forbids him from being in the play because he believes it is a pointless goal. Nurse Ratched, on the other hand, psychologically breaks Billy down because she is determined to maintain emotional control over him. Ratched's compulsive need for psychological power over the patients is established early into the film. As she watches over McMurphy being disruptive, The high angle places her in a position of domination over the patients, and the proxemics demonstrate that she separates herself from them. These choices of cinematography connote that she is not actually committed to helping them improve their conditions. Ratchet's need for control is also established by Billy's quick shift in dialect. The entire movie he speaks with a stutter. This is resolved after he spends time with Candy, but after speaking with Nurse Ratchet, his impediment quickly returns.
Well, you...
Both characters commit suicide shortly after these ordeals. These characters metaphorically come of age. They realize something they're passionate about, only to have it taken away from them. Milos and Weir demonstrate the effects of loss of responsibility because they both end their lives shortly after this. Again, in this trope, the cultural context becomes clear through the way these movies are delivered. Neil's father restricts him from the theater because he believes it will ruin his future. Even though he is nearsighted for thinking this way, it is clear he still loves his son. This dynamic creates a more understandable character for this movie's mass audience to digest. His suicide is romanticized as well. It is very tranquil and he is not shown at all after his death. While in contrast, Billy is dragged away, shouting, and loses his dignity in doing so. And after he dies, he is shown bloodied. This violence was a key trait of post-classical cinema movement, as demonstrated by movies such as Bonnie and Clyde. Despite the bleak and upsetting material up until this point, both of these movies have hopeful or at least heartening endings. In both movies, there's an alternative storyline that demonstrates how coming of age can be a beneficial process. As explained by the Johns Hopkins University Press, these films depict the archetypal death and rebirth myth in which the literal demise of one character precipitates the symbolic springtime resurrection of the remaining group of others to which the sacrificed victim had belonged. Todd Anderson is a foil to Neil. He is Neil's roommate and spends much of his time in the film just gaining confidence and learning how to speak in front of other people. Initially, he is very shy and unwilling to even talk in front of the class. At the end of the movie, his development is clear and it is obvious that he has absorbed the teachings of Mr. Keating and the effect of Neil's death because instead of complying with the school's and his parents' expectations, he is willing to stand on top of his desk to give Mr. Keating justice. Chief has a similar development in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. His story is almost a hyperbole of Todd's, which is reflective of the two movements, because his storyline was not made by studios for a large audience, but instead made largely by the director. Chief begins the story as a perceived deaf mute, instead of just a shy or quiet person. He clearly takes McMurphy's advice when he is finally willing to run away from the institution that he has subjected himself to. However, the justice that he must give to his mentor McMurphy is smothering and suffocating him after his lobotomy. Both of these characters accepted the teachings of their mentors and metaphorically came of age because of this. They are more fortunate than the cautionary tales of Neil and Bibbit. Todd is joined by his classmates and Chief is not caught by Nurse Ratchet, and so the same authority figures are not able to take away their new realization. As previously mentioned, Chief's story is more extreme than Todd's because he was supposedly mute and was obligated to kill his own mentor. This more intense storyline leads to less of a resolution. Chief runs off into the distance, his fate unknown, after killing his own ally. While Todd, his classmates, and Mr. Keating come to the common understanding that Mr. Keating was not responsible for Neil's death. Irresolution is a common characteristic of new Hollywood films, while the satisfying ending of Dead Poets Society is more reflective of the blockbuster era of film. As a part of the new Hollywood and post-classical era of film, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest has a more unprocessed delivery. The characters are unlikable, the content upsetting, and the conclusion unsatisfying. While Dead Poets Society, in contrast, as a part of the modern cinema movement, delivers its message with likable characters, romanticized content, and a gratifying conclusion. Milos Forman and Peter Weir's films both depict the coming-of-age stories and the consequences of taking newfound purpose away. However, the alternate storylines assert that ultimately these purposes are important and the mentor's presence was not useless.